According to myth, the towering stone walls of Troy were constructed by the gods themselves. For generations, they stood as an impenetrable shield, protecting a wealthy kingdom across the Aegean Sea. When a young Trojan prince named Paris abducted Helen, the queen of Sparta, her husband and his allies did not take it lightly. A coalition of Greek kings quickly assembled a massive invasion force, setting sail to demand her return. This timeline illustrates a grueling decade of continuous warfare. The Greeks spent 10 years repeatedly crashing against Troy's defenses, with wave after wave of infantry charging the city, only to bottleneck and be pushed back from the gates. As the conventional tactics dissolve here, we see a decade of failure. The army had reached a physical dead end, leaving them to rely on the individual strengths of their two most famous kings. These leaders offered two very different solutions. First, there was Achilles, a prince of unparalleled physical strength who fought with lethal efficiency. Then there was Odysseus, the King of Ithaca, a man who preferred the mind over the sword and often used deception to avoid direct conflict. The fate of the city would decide which of these powers, physical might or mental ingenuity, was actually the more effective weapon of war. Before the war even began, Achilles' mother received a prophecy. Her son could either live a long, forgotten life of peace or die young in glorious battle. He chose the glory. As an infant, Achilles was dipped into the river Styx, rendering his flesh invulnerable to any weapon, except for a single spot on his heel where he was held. On the battlefield, this made him an anomaly, a warrior who could move with total confidence, carving through Trojan ranks without hesitation. But his immense power was tied to his pride. When the Greek commander Agamemnon disrespected him by taking away his prized concubine, Achilles simply withdrew his support. Without his strength, the Greek army suffered heavy losses and nearly lost the war. He only returned to the slaughter after the Trojan prince Hector killed his closest friend, Patroclus. Consumed by grief, Achilles hunted Hector down, plunged a spear into his neck, and tied his corpse to a chariot. He paraded the body through the dust, turning his private grief into a public spectacle for the Trojans to watch from the walls above. Yet, despite his martial supremacy, Achilles would never see the inside of Troy. Guided by the god Apollo, Prince Paris fired a single poisoned arrow that struck the hero in his one vulnerable heel, killing him instantly. Physical brawn had won the Greeks' individual skirmishes and secured Achilles his personal legend, but the sheer physical pressure had completely failed to breach the walls. With their greatest warrior dead, the Greek camp fell into despair. A decade had passed, thousands of men were gone, and the city's defenses remained completely untouched. The burden of victory now fell to Odysseus. Unlike Achilles, Odysseus had never wanted to fight, even going so far as to pretend he was insane just to avoid being drafted. He was a man who always favored the mind over the sword. This diagram illustrates their failure, direct assaults funneling into a killing zone. To bypass this barrier, Odysseus moved the battle into the Trojans' minds. On the map, Greek units retreat to their ships and sail away, manufacturing a false victory. In their wake, they left behind a massive wooden horse, framing it as a divine peace offering. In reality, the structure was hollowed out to hide Odysseus and a strike team of elite Greek warriors inside. Odysseus weaponized the Trojans' own hope and relief. He understood that intellect could slip right through the front door of a fortress that physical might could never dent. Blinded by 10 years of exhaustion and eager to celebrate their apparent survival, the Trojans dismissed the desperate warnings of their local prophet, Cassandra. They willingly dragged the enormous wooden horse inside their own gates. That night, while the city slept off its celebrations, the trap sprang. Odysseus and his men emerged from the belly of the beast, sliding down to the cobblestones to slaughter the guards and throw the main gates wide open from the inside. The Greek fleet had not retreated. They had simply waited under the cover of darkness. Now thousands of soldiers flooded the streets, looting homes and burning the kingdom of Troy to the ground. The walls built by the gods remained standing and unyielded. Instead of breaking them, human cunning simply found a way through the front door. Achilles achieved the eternal glory he sought, but he paid for it with his life. His story ended permanently in the blood and dust of the Trojan coast. Odysseus, on the other hand, used his intellect to win an impossible 10-year war and, crucially, secured his own survival. Brute force will always be immortalized in ancient legends, but it was the quiet power of the mind that actually secured the victory. And for Odysseus, keeping his wits about him was essential, because his greatest test, a 10-year journey back home to Ithaca, was only just beginning.